Hello, I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing, bringing you up to date with all you need to know on day 109 of the US-Israel war with Iran. We'll get the very latest from our correspondents on the ground in Washington, the G7 summit in France and in Jerusalem, as well as here in London. Let's start with some of today's key developments. Donald Trump says his preliminary deal to end the war means Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. He meets allies from the Middle East at the G7 summit, claiming without him there would be no Israel. Fighting between Israel and Hezbollah continues, drawing criticism from Trump and Iran, which insists Israeli troops must withdraw from Lebanon. Benjamin Netanyahu says his troops will not be withdrawing, and the framework deal was reached between Iran and the US, not Israel. Talks on a permanent peace agreement to end the war between Iran and the US will begin on Friday in Geneva, where the two sides will meet to formally ratify the deal. Details of the Memorandum of Understanding electronically signed on Sunday have yet to be released. Speaking at the G7 summit in France, President Trump was optimistic about the deal.
It should be successful. It goes to a second stage, which I think will be actually easier. I didn't want to attack them last week, but we had no choice. We did it twice, actually. We were doing it a third time. We were able to not have to do that. But we have a deal that's a fair deal. It's a good deal. We are not investing any money in Iran, by the way. Rumor got out there yesterday. It was ridiculous. We have the right to go in someday and do. If I want to do something, or if somebody wants to do something, we are not investing any money. We have no obligation to invest any money in Iran.
Well, as part of the deal, Trump added... Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. I would say that's about 99.9%. Let's go to Washington. Our White House reporter Bernd Busemann is there. Bernd, what do we make of Donald Trump's words here?
Well, Donald Trump is very much framing this as a victory that essentially he says got what the U.S. wanted, which was a commitment from Iran not to ever manufacture a nuclear weapon and to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the Strait of Hormuz was open before the war began, so that became one of the primary military objectives here. But he says that's been kind of achieved. I think the main difference that President Trump also wants to get out is this is, in his eyes, a very different deal from President Obama's JCPOA with Iran. The main difference, according to this White House, is that any financial compensation or any sanctions relief that Iran gets going forward is performance-based. President Trump has been very critical of the earlier deal. But of course, critics of President Trump will say that earlier JCPOA, whatever faults it has, the IAEA did say that Iran was complying with it, as did the State Department at the time, and that any improvements he wanted to make on it could have been done in office during his first term rather than just destroying the deal as he did in withdrawing from it. So I think we're seeing him claim it as a victory, but we still don't have many of the details of exactly what this will look like in practice.
Thank you, Bernd. Well, Trump made his comments on the second day of the G7 summit in the French town of Evian. Focus of the summit has turned to the situation in the Middle East, where leaders of Egypt, United Arab Emirates and Qatar are joining a lunchtime discussion which explored the consequences of Trump's preliminary deal on the wider region. My colleague Christian Fraser is in Evian. What's the mood there today, Christian? My colleague Christian Fraser is in Evian.
I think the Iran agreement and the digital signing of the agreement has certainly lifted the mood at the G7 summit. It's been broadly welcomed by the Arab leaders who are here in Evian, but there's an awful lot of detail we still don't know, and an awful lot still to be worked out. Donald Trump was saying today in one of his bilateral meetings that he believes the second stage of this will be easy. Well, when you look back at the JCPOA, it took 20 months to negotiate the deal with Iran. It was 160 pages long. way, this memorandum of understanding is but a page and a half in detail. So it's really only a basis for negotiation. And a lot of the focus right now is on what the Iranians might have been promised. The French team are adamant that there should be indefinitely toll-free passage through the Strait of Hormuz and that the Iranians don't benefit from that. The Gulf states might question the sort of figures that are being bandied around. So Donald Trump has dismissed this idea that the Iranians would get up to $300 billion to rebuild their economy if they comply with the negotiation. The Gulf states haven't talked about that, but it's suggested they would pay for it. They've not discounted it, but you can see it from their perspective. It's their industries that have been disrupted. It's their economies that have suffered greatly under bombardment from the Iranians. And now, supposedly, they are being asked to pay for the reconstruction of Iran. As I say, Donald Trump has rejected the idea of that, but J.D. Vance, in an interview with CBS News, our sister channel, overnight, confirmed that that figure could be there in the text, so long as they comply with it. But there's an awful lot of detail that we still don't know, and I would suggest that that figure is part of the negotiation.
Thank you, Christian.
An awful lot
Iran
of detail that we
insists
still
that
don't
ending
know,
the conflict in Lebanon
that
is
figure
an
is
integral
part of the
part of the
negotiation.
agreement with the US. Thank you,
Its
Christian.
top
Negotiator says
Iran
Israel
insists
must
that
withdraw
ending the
from
conflict
occupied
in Lebanon
areas
is
in the
an
country.
integral part
People
of
of
the
southern
agreement
Lebanon
with the
must
US.
return to their homes, she said.
Negotiator says
On a
Israel
Telegram
must withdraw
messaging
from occupied
channel.
areas
With me is
in the
BBC's
country.
Persian, BBC
People of
Persian's
southern
Bashir
Lebanon must return to their
Goljar.
homes,
Just
she said.
explain to us, if you can, why
messaging
Iran is
channel.
so
With me is BBC's
wedded
Persian,
and
BBC
concerned with
Persian's
what happens in
Bashir
Lebanon.
Well, Hezbollah is one of the
Explain to us, if
oldest
you can,
and most
why
powerful
Iran
allies
is so
of Iran.
wedded
Over the
and
decades,
concerned with what
Iran
happens
have
in Lebanon.
invested billions of
Hezbollah
dollars
is one of the
in
oldest
organizing,
and most
training, and
powerful
arming this
ally
group.
of Iran.
And as a matter of fact,
Over the
actually,
decades,
Hezbollah
Iran have
served invested as a
billions of
deterrence
dollars
against
in
Israel for Iran.
organizing, training,
Is a
and arming
strategic
this group.
location to influence
And as a matter of fact,
Lebanon and
actually,
also
Hezbollah
reaching
served
Mediterranean. And as
as
you
a
see
deterrence
right now in
against
the
Israel for
negotiation
Iran
with the US,
is a
Iran
strategic
using
location to
Lebanon and
influence
Hezbollah as a
Lebanon and
leverage
also reaching
to gain
Mediterranean.
more point.
And as
But
you
in the
see
same
right now
time,
in the
it has a
negotiation
message
with the
for
US,
its
Iran
allies in the
using
region. Last
Lebanon and
night,
Hezbollah as a
Louis,
leverage
the
to
commander
gain
of
more
Iran's
point.
Revolutionary Guards,
But at the
elite
same
Quds
time,
Force,
it has
which
a message
does
for its allies in the
clandestine
region.
operation.
Last
Ismail
night,
Khani
Louis,
come
the
on a
commander
rare
of
interview on
Iran's
television.
Revolutionary Guards,
He
elite
talked
Quds
about
Force,
Hezbollah and
which
how important
does
Hezbollah is for
clandestine
Iran.
operation.
And
Ismail
Hezbollah, he
Khani
said, has
on
shown
a
that
rare
in the past
interview
3
on
months that
television.
he is
He
still
talked about
able
Hezbollah and
and
how
capable
important
of attacking
Hezbollah is
Israel
for Iran.
and is a formidable
And
force in the
Hezbollah, he
region,
said,
and it
has
is there
shown
to
that in the
remain.
past 3 months
And I
that
think
he is
Iranians
still
are trying in the past
able
year
and
try
capable
to
of attacking
support
Israel
Hezbollah.
and
Hezbollah
is a
was
formidable force in the
severely
region, and it is
weakened
there
by
to
Israeli
remain.
attack.
And I
But
think
at this point
Iranians
of time,
are trying
Iran
in the
feels
past
that
year
in this
try to
round of the
support
fight, Hezbollah has been a very
severely
key
weakened
component
by
of the fight
Israeli
against
attack. But at
US
this
and
point of
Israel,
time,
and
Iran
also not
feels that
Hezbollah,
in this
also the
round
Shia
of the-
militias in Iran
the
has been
fight,
helping
Hezbollah has
Iran
been a
in this
very
round
key
of fight
component
against
of the
US.
fight
US
against US and
bases
Israel, and
in
also not
Iraq was
Hezbollah, also
targeted
the
by
Shia
Shia
militias in
militias
Iran
there.
has
And I think
been
also
helping
Iran want to
Iran
send a
in
message
this
to its ally
round
in the
of
region.
fight
We do not
against
abandon
US.
you. We will support you. We will stay
bases in
behind you.
Iraq was
Also
targeted by
domestically,
Shia
it wants to
militias
say
there.
the
And I think
investment,
also
billions
Iran
of
wanna send a
dollars we
message
have
to its ally
invested
in
on
the
this
region.
proxy
We
group
do not
is
abandon
paying
you.
off.
We will
Sure,
support
thank you very much
we will
for
stay
running us through that.
behind you.
Well,
Also,
Israel remains the
domestically,
wild
want to
card
say
in this
the
peace
investment,
deal.
billions of
Prime Minister
dollars we
Benjamin
have
Netanyahu
invested on
said
this
late
proxy
on
group
Monday the
is
deal
paying
was
off.
struck by the United States, not Israel. And Israeli troops will not be leaving Lebanon. He added the war saved Israel
Prime
from
Minister
the
Benjamin
threat of
Netanyahu
nuclear
said late on
annihilation.
Monday the deal
Both
was
recent
struck by the
operations in
United States,
historic collaboration with President Trump and the U.S. military, if we wouldn't have taken that action, they would have already had atomic bombs. Both recent operations in
continues to
historic
strike
collaboration
Hezbollah
with
targets
President
in
Trump
Lebanon
and
for a
the
second
U.S.
day since the
military,
deal
if we
was
wouldn't have
announced, killing at
taken
least
that
4 people
action,
on Tuesday.
they would have already
And some
had
of his
atomic
most
bombs.
pointed criticism.
Trump
Trump
said
said too many
Hezbollah
people
targets
had been
in
killed in
Lebanon for a
Lebanon,
second day
and
since
Israel
the deal
didn't need
was
to knock
announced,
down
killing
an
at least
apartment
4
block
people on
every time
Tuesday.
it was looking for
Some of
someone
his
from
most
Hezbollah.
pointed criticism.
He called on
Trump
Netanyahu
said
to be
many
more
people
responsible.
had been killed in Lebanon.
Without the
And
United
Israel
States,
didn't
there would
need
be
to knock
no
down an
Israel.
apartment block every time time.
Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did.
Netanyahu to be well, let's take you now to Jerusalem. Our correspondent Charlotte
States, there would be
there.
no
Hi,
Israel.
Charlotte. So Donald Trump, not the only one criticising Benjamin
Netanyahu. No other
Netanyahu.
president was willing to do what I did.
No, not at all, Lewis. This is a
take you,
complete
now to
disaster for
Jerusalem.
Benjamin
Our correspondent
Netanyahu, it
Charlotte
seems.
Gallagher.
Now,
Hi,
he always
Charlotte.
portrayed
So Donald
himself
Trump,
as
not
someone
the
who
only
had
one
real
criticising
influence
Benjamin
on Donald
Netanyahu.
Trump and someone who could
No,
take on
not at all,
Iran
Lewis. This
and
is
win.
a complete
Tonight,
disaster
it seems
for
that the
Benjamin
Iranian
Netanyahu, it
regime
seems.
may be stronger
Now,
than
he
it
always
was before,
portrayed
and
himself as someone who had
embarrassingly
real
for Mr.
influence on
Netanyahu,
Donald
it seems that
Trump and
Iran has
someone
more
who could
influence
take
on
on
President
Iran
Trump than
and
he
win.
does. And as you heard there,
Tonight,
President Trump
it
has
seems that
again
the
been
Iranian
criticising
regime may be
Mr.
stronger than
Netanyahu,
it was
particularly
before,
for those
and
strikes
embarrassingly
on
for Mr.
Beirut over the
Netanyahu.
weekend,
It seems
saying
that
they were
Iran has more
disproportionate,
influence
essentially,
on
and as you
President
heard there,
Trump
saying
than he
you don't
does.
need to
And
bring
as you
down
heard
a
there,
whole
President Trump
apartment
has
block
again
if you're
been
just looking for
criticising
one
Mr.
person.
Netanyahu,
And he also
particularly for
said,
those
if you can believe this, that the
strikes
Syrian
on
president,
Beirut
a
over the
former
weekend,
jihadist
saying
militant,
they were
had perhaps
disproportionate,
dealt with
essentially, as you
Hezbollah
heard there,
more
saying you don't need
successfully
to bring down
than
a
Benjamin
whole
Netanyahu.
apartment
So I
block if
think
you're just looking for
incredibly
one
embarrassing
person.
for
And
the
he also
Israeli
said,
Prime
if you
Minister.
can believe this,
Also,
that
we're
the
hearing from
Syrian
the Israeli
president, a
media
former
that
jihadist
Israel
militant,
asked to look at that
had
peace
perhaps
deal
dealt with
framework
Hezbollah
and was
more
told
successfully
no.
than
So at this
Benjamin
point,
Netanyahu.
Israel
So I
looking
think
incredibly isolated
embarrassing
at
for
this
the
stage.
Israeli Prime
Now,
Minister.
at the moment,
Also, we're
there's a
hearing from
general
the Israeli
election
media
coming up in
that
Israel.
Israel
The
asked to
political
look at that
opponents of
peace
Benjamin
deal
Netanyahu
framework
are
and was
circling,
told
and they're
no.
using this
So at
as
this
an
point,
excuse to
Israel
attack
looking
him and saying, look, you
incredibly
started this war,
isolated
you
at
couldn't
this
finish this
stage.
war, you went
Now,
into it with
at
the
the
US,
moment,
you're
there's a
ending it
general
on your
election
own.
coming up
So I
in
think it's going to be a
Israel.
real
Political
heated
opponents of
debate as we
Benjamin
get towards this
Netanyahu
general
are
election.
circling.
But
And
it's
they're
not a
using
great
this
day for
as an
Benjamin
excuse to
Netanyahu
attack
at
him
all.
and saying, look, you
And
started
Charlotte,
this
just
war,
before I let you
couldn't
go,
finish this
there
war,
is
you
so
went
much
into it with the
attention
US,
and focus
you're
on
ending
the
it on your
personal
own. So I think it's going to
relationship
be a real
between
heated
Donald
debate as
Trump
we
and
get
Benjamin
towards this general election.
Netanyahu. And these
But it's
latest
not a
comments have
great day
been
for Benjamin
some of the
Netanyahu
most
at
pointed that we've
Charlotte, just
heard.
before I let you go,
Is this a
there is
fundamental
so much
breakdown in
attention
the
and
relationship
focus
or
on the
not?
personal relationship
I think it depends what
between
happens.
Donald
I mean,
Trump
we
and
do know,
Benjamin
Lewis, that Donald
Netanyahu.
Trump
These
can be
latest
changeable.
comments have
I think
been
that's a bit of an
some of the
understatement.
most
But I think it
pointed,
really depends
that
what
we've
happens
heard.
inside
Is this a
Lebanon.
fundamental
If
breakdown
Benjamin
in the
Netanyahu
relationship
shows
or not?
restraint, as Donald Trump wants
I think
in
it
these strikes
depends
against
what
Hezbollah,
happens. I mean,
or
we
if
do
he
know,
listens to
Lewis,
people
that
inside
Donald
his own
Trump can
cabinet
be
and his
changeable.
political
I think that's
opponents
a bit of an
that want to
understatement.
keep
But I think
going
it
on the
really depends
offensive
what
in southern
happens
Lebanon.
inside
And I think if he
Lebanon.
does
If
that, that could
Benjamin
risk his
Netanyahu
relationship
shows
with Donald Trump
restraint, as
even
Donald
further.
Trump
They
wants
don't
in
look
these
like
strikes
these
against
strong
Hezbollah,
allies, these
or
good
if he
friends
listens to people
that they once
inside
used
his
to.
own cabinet and his political
Charlotte, thank you very
opponents
much for
that want to
that.
keep going
So
on
what
the
does all this mean for the
offensive in southern
situation more
Lebanon. And I
widely
think
in
if
the
he
Middle
does
East?
that,
And is there
that could
a
risk
way
his
out
relationship with Donald
of
Trump
this?
even
Leave
further.
me as
They
our Chief
don't look
International
like these
Correspondent
strong
used to say,
allies,
Ty
these
Lees.
good friends
So
that they once
there's a
used
couple
to.
of potentially
Charlotte,
large
thank you very much
stumbling
for
blocks
that.
here. We've
So
just
what does
touched
all
on
this mean for
the
the
issue of
situation
Lebanon.
more
So let's
widely
start
in the
there.
Middle
How
East? Is there
significant
a way
do you
out
think
of
the
this?
words we've heard
Leave
from
me as our Chief
Israel, that
International
they want to
Correspondent used to
carry
say,
on leaving
Ty
their
Lees.
troops
So,
there, and Donald
there's a
Trump's
couple of
criticism
potentially
of Benjamin
large stumbling blocks here.
Netanyahu?
We've
How
just
significant
touched
is
on
this?
the issue
It's a
of
pivotal
Lebanon. So
moment
let's
in the
start
long-standing,
there.
very
How
strategic
significant,
relationship
do you
between
think
Israel
the
and
words
the
we've
United
heard from
States, and in the
Israel,
personal
that they want
and
to
political
carry on
friendship
leaving
of
their
Prime Minister
troops
Netanyahu
there,
and
Donald
President
Trump's
Trump. Throughout
criticism of
this
Benjamin
war, they have
Netanyahu?
emphasized how they are
significant is
walking
this?
in lockstep.
It's a pivotal
Yes,
moment
they
in the
sometimes may have
long-standing, very
differences,
strategic relationship
but that it is
between
President
Israel
Trump
and
who
the
is calling the
United
shots,
States,
although
and
Prime Minister
personal
Netanyahu
and political
has continued to
friendship of
emphasize,
Prime
and
Minister
indeed through the
Netanyahu
Gaza war
and
as
President
well,
Trump.
since
Throughout
2023, that
this
when it
war,
comes to
they have
Israel's security
emphasized
interests,
how they
he
are
calls,
walking in
he
lockstep.
literally
Yes, they
calls the
sometimes may have
shots.
differences,
Now the
but
public
that it is
criticism has
President Trump
reached
who
a
is calling
point
the shots,
that this
although
is
Prime Minister
harming Prime Minister
has
Netanyahu
continued to emphasize,
domestically,
and indeed through the
politically,
Gaza war,
just
as
as
well,
he's
since
about to face face elections, and he is running again for Prime Minister. So he will then be not just, he will then be focusing not as a wartime leader, but as a politician wanting to be re-elected. And as we know, politicians can be unpredictable. He's going to try to read the electorate. But back to the point about Lebanon, this is an achievement for Iran in making it clear that there will be no movement forward unless Lebanon is considered part of the equation, part of the ceasefire. And President Trump has come around to that with the kind of language, really extraordinary language, we've heard today vis-a-vis Prime Minister Netanyahu and what he regards, and indeed politicians across the political spectrum in Israel, regard as Israel's legitimate right to attack where it sees its security interests are affected. This is a very unpredictable and it's a very perilous moment, but it underlines just how fragile the situation is.
And what are some of the strategic options here then for Israel Israel specifically, because many from the outside might look and say you have a chance for peace, you have a chance to do what Donald Trump wants here. You've got an election coming up, you could wrap things up pretty nicely, but at the moment it doesn't feel like that's the direction of the strategic options within Israel. What are its different options, because many from the outside might.
So it's interesting the language that President Trump used, and very callous language, in saying, why does he think he has to blow up a building just to get someone or a commander or something, and really pointing to the fact that every time there is an attack targeting a Hezbollah leader, a whole block, a whole street is destroyed, civilian casualties, and of course that has been in the southern suburbs of Beirut as well as in large parts of southern Lebanon. The fact that he is saying that, because the Israelis have tended to see only a military way forward, while there are others, including the Lebanese government, which is now in talks with Israel, is saying, we also want to disarm Hezbollah, but we can't do it while there's a war going on. Let's have a real ceasefire across Lebanon, give us space and time to disarm Hezbollah. And there are reports that Arab leaders as well are saying, give us time, we will work with Hezbollah, we will find a political solution, because Hezbollah has always said that if there is no Israeli occupation, if they don't feel they're under attack by Israel. So the pieces are moving a little bit, but Prime Minister Netanyahu, he has responded militarily and wants to believe that by military means, by assassinating top leaders, he can find a way forward. I think history tells us, because they're going back and forth again and again, ceasefire, collapse, the pieces fighting again. So there is a moment where others are looking at other options. He has responded militarily.
Thank you very much for putting all that in a bit of context for us. Thank you. And whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, Radio or TV, thank you.
Because they're going back and forth again and again.
With the Iran war today.
Collapse, fighting again. So there is a moment where others are looking at other options.
Please, thank you very much for putting all that in a bit of context for us. Thank you. And whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, Radio or TV, thank you for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran war today.